So the title I was given was Congestion or Challenge. In a very city council kind of way, I changed it to Challenge or Opportunity because we don't like to talk about challenges and problems without talking about opportunities and possibilities as well. So I'm an urban planner by education. I'm not a transport engineer. I'm not a transportation planner. I'm a city planner, basically, educated in the UK. Um, and as you say, I was working in London when the congestion charge was introduced in 2003. There was a policy officer, so I was working a lot with stakeholder engagement, with following the impacts, with kind of holding people's hand when it got scary, more or less, which is kind of my best description of what a transportation or a city planner's job is holding people's hand when it gets scary. Um, so I was still at Transport for London in 2006 when Stockholm decided to introduce congestion charging. But I had studied previously in Stockholm and knew lots of the people who were involved in implementing it. So I was kind of here probably about once a week by the end of just before the trial was introduced, in order to be an advisor to help them with our experience, basically sharing our experience in the hope that we would be able to share some of their experiences of when the charge was introduced. In 2007, the congestion charge in London was extended westwards, pretty much doubled in size. It was later reduced again, but when this extension was introduced, I was assistant traffic manager for that scheme, and that was looking a lot about how we work with complementary measures, how we make the bus system work, how can we make sure that there aren't any negative impacts of implementing this congestion tax. We're not just moving the congestion to other parts of the road network. By summer of 2007, I'd been headhunted basically and came to work for the city of Stockholm and was manager of the permanent implementation of the congestion tax, which was after a referendum, but I'll get back to that later. And then most recently, for the past 12 months or so, I've been working as project manager for a number of quite big changes that have been made to the congestion tax in Stockholm, but I'll come back to that as well. So these two cities, they're very different. London, a huge mega city, basically a population of about 8.5 million, very high density, a huge kind of travel to work area, reasonably high levels of car ownership. But I wanted to really make this comparison to Stockholm and kind of destroy the myth that Stockholm is some kind of car-free paradise. Swedes like cars. We have a lot of cars. We have more cars than Londoners. About 390 cars per 1,000 people in Stockholm. That's a lot, but a very small, a much smaller city than London, obviously, less than 1 million people, but growing very rapidly. But yeah, I think it's kind of significant to say I meet a lot of delegations, as I say, who come to Stockholm to study our transportation planning and our congestion tax system in particular, and they all kind of come with some impression that we're all bicycle riding like the Dutch or the Danes and very low car use. We're not. Swedish people really like cars. We're a big country. Lots of people have country houses. Car ownership it's not as high as a lot of North American cities maybe, but it's significant. I put a question mark on this. Did they have the same problem? And I think this is something I've reflected over quite a lot. London is a very large, dense city. It's got a very high transit share, but what it had was a really serious, and still has to a certain extent, a really serious all-day congestion problem across large parts of the network, across large parts of the day. It's well into the evening in certain parts of the city, in kind of entertainment districts, for example, or shopping districts. And the authorities in London have spent lots of time and effort and energy putting lots of restrictions in place to try and fix this problem. So they use, for example, red routes, which is kind of the key highway, the core highway network, where lots of effort is put into managing parking, to taking out parking, to getting the traffic flowing as much as possible. Parking is very heavily managed and is rather expensive. Traffic signals are networked. There's lots of bus priority. So spent a lot of effort trying to fix transportation problems, trying to make the transport system work better with lots and lots and lots of restrictions. And there was a public perception still that traffic was a really big problem. So it was easy in London to say you know, we've really tried everything. We've tried everything we can to make this transportation system work. We've tried everything we can to reduce congestion. Congestion charging, it's nasty medicine. Nobody likes it, but it's the last thing we can try. You know, you could really put forward this argument that we've really tried everything. Stockholm is a very different story. Stockholm is it's a much smaller city. It has a very dense core, very dense, or a more dense core. It has high transit mode to and from the core, but much lower outside of it. And it led to peak congestion. So there were commuter flows to the city in the morning, out of the city in the evening, but actually very few traffic restrictions in place otherwise. There's parking charging in the city, otherwise very little in the way of kind of turning restrictions. There's lots and lots of on-street parking. People behave in traffic in the center of Stockholm in the way they would behave in a small town. Basically, you can make U-turns in the middle of the major street in the middle of rush hour. You can get a parking space outside your favorite restaurant, and you know, there's not a huge amount of restrictions are being made. But there was nevertheless a public perception again that traffic was a really big problem. And I think this is a really interesting comparison. Again, when I was working in London, I was able to say, we've tried everything, now we're going to try this. It's kind of the last resort. In Stockholm, we were never able to say that because there was you knew there were so many things that we could have done before we went to congestion pricing. We could have worked with the parking restrictions. We could have worked with parking charging. We could have banned turns. We could have. There's a lot you could have done. And I kind of joke sometimes that congestion pricing in Stockholm has been a way of allowing Stockholmers to carry on behaving like they live in a small town and driving to their favorite restaurants and doing U-turns in the middle of Sveavägen, this huge central street. But the most important thing, irrespective of what had been done and how these cities compare in a kind of objective way, the public perception was that traffic was a really big problem and somebody needed to do something. Somebody needs to fix it. I put in this aerial shot of Stockholm partly because it's really pretty, and partly to demonstrate why a city of only around 1 million people, 2.2 million in the metropolitan region, actually did have quite a serious congestion problem. And that's because most of the city is built on islands. Can you see my arrow? So here's the old town of Stockholm. This is the downtown area. My office is here. I am sitting right now exactly here. But the downtown area of Stockholm is built on about 16 islands, and that means that any journey you're making of more than a couple of kilometers, you need to cross a bridge. And these bridges they're really big bottlenecks in the transportation system. So it was leading to there being a congestion or a queue problem, rather, a queue in the morning and evening peak that was rather more severe than you would imagine from a city of this size. I still laugh when my colleagues tell me Stockholm is really unique because it's built on islands and bridges, and then I think, but you know, most of the cities in the world are built on islands and bridges. Have you heard of New York or Vancouver or San Francisco or Auckland or Sydney? You know, cities by definition are almost always built on kind of complex networks of islands and waterways and bridges and tunnels. Stockholm is, yes, maybe slightly more extreme, but in no way unique. But it's kind of part of the explanation of why a relatively small city did have what was perceived to be quite a severe congestion problem. So we have two very different cities that have, or at least perceive themselves to have the same problem, but there were two rather different political responses. And these two characters here on the left is Ken Livingstone, who was mayor of London at the time that the congestion charge was introduced there. On the right is Annika Billström, who was mayor of Stockholm at the time that the congestion tax was introduced. They're two very different political systems. So the mayor of London is a directly elected mayor. He is, it's always been a he, unfortunately. He has the biggest political mandate in Europe, basically. It's a directly elected politician with kind of, in Europe, in the UK at least, kind of a really big personal mandate, and doesn't answer to a city council, doesn't answer to a parliament. He answers instead to an assembly, and the assembly's role is basically just scrutiny. The only power the assembly has is to veto the mayor's budget, and you know that's pretty big power, but they can't meddle in very much else that he can do. So he had this executive power to implement the congestion charge, and he did that. Notoriously, the mayor has, or this mayor, Ken Livingstone at least, he had a very large number of political advisors. So he had an advisor on health, he had an advisor on transport, an advisor on the environment, an advisor on housing, on equalities, on all the areas that his mandate covered. And notoriously, his advisors never agreed on anything. The one thing they ever agreed on was don't introduce congestion charging. It's political suicide. Don't do it. Fortunately, he didn't listen to them, and he decided to implement it anyway. If we turn to Stockholm, Annika Billström, who was then the mayor, our current mayor, Karin Vangård, they did not have anything like the same personal mandate or political power. They answer to, or are part of, in fact, a 101-member city council. So we have a parliamentary style of government. There's a cabinet. Annika Billström was from the Social Democratic Party. She was entirely dependent on the Green Party, on the Left Party, for her majority. Our current mayor, Karin Vangård, is part of a coalition of 4 parties. There are 9 different parties represented on the city council, so it's a much more kind of coalition style of government. Lots of coalition politics, lots of horse trading, lots of deals having to be made, lots of formal and informal deals. And that's basically what the congestion tax was a huge coalition compromise, and it wasn't even a coalition compromise in the city council. It was a coalition compromise in the parliament. So the Green Party supported the Social Democrats in the National Parliament, and one of their requirements for supporting them was that there would be a trial of congestion charging in Stockholm. So this mayor, Annika Billström, she had in fact said in the election campaign that there was no way she would introduce congestion charging during her period of office if she got elected. She wasn't lying, but she made a promise she wasn't able to keep, because basically her Prime Minister, Göran Persson, told her, yes, you're going to have to in order to make this coalition work. We could have a whole week of presentations about the politics behind the congestion charging in Stockholm. It's completely fascinating. But I think it's 2 very different types of governance. It's a mayor in London who said in his manifesto he would introduce charging, a mayor in Stockholm who said she absolutely wouldn't, but was forced to in the coalition. So the politics behind it, again, it's important, but it's important to know that there were 2 very different approaches that both have worked. So it's nice to imagine that it's Sweden and everybody supported this idea because it was very rational. It's not the case at all. This is some headlines from a national newspaper in Sweden at the time, very, very critical of the decision. This is saying thousands of people marching against the car tolls, a clear no to congestion charging. It's time to admit that we failed. Only a miracle can save this project. This is my favorite. Compared to Annika Billström, the mayor, the leadership of Cuba seems democratic. This is the leader of the opposition getting very angry about it. People protesting on the street saying bang your horn against the car tolls. This was possibly the most serious accusation in both Stockholm and in London. Congestion charging was going to affect growth. It was going to affect the inward investment. People wouldn't come to the centre of Stockholm to shop. There'd be tumbleweeds in the street because the city would be emptied of people, basically. That wasn't the case. I will come back to that, but it was a very serious accusation at the time and was probably one of the most difficult to deal with in both cities. Very quickly, looking at the schemes themselves, they're again 2 very different solutions to the same kind of problem, but doing the same kind of thing. This is a map of the scheme in London. It's an area-wide charge. It's decided locally by the mayor. He has to consult, but that's basically all he has to do. Otherwise, he can make pretty much an executive decision. And it's a flat daily rate, so you pay once a day, and then once you've paid your charge, you can drive as much as you like within this charging zone. You don't pay to cross this boundary, you pay to be on the road here at all. So even if my journey is starting here and finishing here, I should pay the congestion charge. At the time it was introduced, it was based on prepayment and with camera enforcement. This is an image of one of the entries to the charging zone. So you're seeing a sign telling you that you're coming into the charging zone, what times does it apply. And the business end of the system is this camera pole here. So it's a series of cameras directed at vehicle license plates. It's reading vehicle license plates. It's turning this image into text, and it's sending it away to a data processing center, which is dealing with payment. This is the Stockholm scheme, about twice the size, in fact. Around 350,000 people live within this charging zone. We have, again, here's downtown, the old town rather. Here's the downtown area. I live here. I live just outside the congestion charging zone. Don't read anything into that. It's just cheaper. It's a cordon charge, so I'm paying every time you cross this boundary, and you're paying whether you drive in or drive out, you're paying the same thing. But if my journey is entirely within the charging zone, I don't pay anything. The charge is per passage and is varying according to the congestion. So if there's more congestion at times that lots of people want to travel by car, so in the morning and evening peak hour, it's costing a lot more. In the middle of the day, it's costing less. At night and at weekends, it's not costing anything. The system it's kind of a 2.0 system compared to how congestion charging in London works, because it's based on camera registration and then sending monthly bills. There was kind of a more complex system when it was first introduced. But since it was made permanent in 2007, it's been all about sending a monthly bill, and you get a bill in the same way you get a bill for your water or your electricity or your telephone, and you pay it with all your other bills. This is what it looks like when you drive into a congestion charging zone. It looks like a huge science experiment, and that's partly because it was a huge science experiment when it was built. It was introduced first as a trial, and there were two things about the trial. One is that it had to go very quickly. The other was that it had to have lots and lots of redundancy, because it was really, really essential that it worked from day one. And that's why the system looks kind of ugly like this. So you've got two sets of cameras here. One is looking at forward license plates, one is looking at rear license plates. In the middle, you have a laser curtain. Basically, the car is triggering. It's an incredibly over redundancy in this system, and that's partly because it's a tax. In the UK, it's a charge, which means that if some people don't pay the charge, it's not a huge big deal. You can have like 90% accuracy and be quite happy with that. In Stockholm, it's a tax, and Swedish people take tax very, very seriously. So the capture rate has to be something like 99.99%, and apparently, according to people who operate it, we're getting there. So this is what the first generation looked like. It's kind of ugly. This is what the newer gantries are looking like. This is actually in Gothenburg, which also has a congestion charging system. I'd like to point out I was in the passenger seat when I took this picture. I was not driving and taking photos of charging infrastructure. But it's a lot. Yeah. Okay, you can see the difference. It's just taking up a lot of space. It's kind of, I don't want to say it's attractive, but it fits into the environment a bit better. If we turn to the impacts, this is the slide from London, but I could actually show you the same slide, and I will in a second, and you'd see pretty much the same results. And this is, I think, one of the most amazing things, is it's two very different cities, two different systems set up in different ways for different purposes partly, and yet the impacts are, if not identical, very, very similar. So in London, we see traffic to and from the charging zone is reduced by about 17%. There's a lot of vehicles don't pay, so if you just look at the vehicles that are paying, then you actually cut numbers by around 30%. And congestion, and there's different ways to measure congestion, but the way that London measured congestion, they reckon that the congestion within this charging zone was down by around 26%. More people use buses, and bus reliability and journey time in particular improved massively. One of the side effects of congestion charging that we weren't entirely prepared for, and actually took a lot of effort, was we had to basically rewrite the entire bus timetable because bus reliability had improved so much. And one of the worst things you can do as a bus driver is not turn up to the bus stop late, it's leave the bus stop too early. It's a much bigger crime, if you like, from the bus operator's point of view, is to leave your bus stop too early. So what was happening is buses were getting to the bus stops too early. They were sitting and waiting for the time that they could leave. So the passengers were getting very frustrated, obviously, because it's always better to be on a moving bus than a bus that's standing still. So we had to rewrite lots of the bus timetables. Significant, and this is important from the business point of view, there was very little or no, in fact, change to the number of trips to central London. So people were still coming to London. They were doing it in different ways. Around 50 to 60% of those trips that disappear, and you can't really talk about trips that disappear, but yeah, you follow me. Around a half or just over half, you could find them in public transport. There's a number turn up in cycling and walking. There's a number we think turn up in car sharing. There's a number that turn up at different times of day because you've especially done time shifting to weekends or to evenings. And what we think is a lot of journeys that they've made journeys more effective. So instead of driving to the centre of London every day or 2 to 3 days a week, you drive to the centre of London 1 day a week, do everything you need to do with your car, and then go home again. and either you go somewhere else or you find a different way to go to London the other days. So I said the Stockholm numbers were about the same, and they are. So traffic to and from the centre of Stockholm fell by about 18 to 20%, queue times down 30 to 50%. A big important part of, or a big important goal of the Stockholm scheme, which was not emissions of oxides of nitrogen and other kind of harmful pollutants, PM10s in particular. And they saw, all three of them actually saw reductions of around 10 to 14%, and that's concurrent with the reduction of vehicle kilometres. Again, bus passenger was up, bus reliability is better, journey time was improved. We had to rewrite all the timetables. A nice thing to have to do, but it's a huge job to do. And again, little or no change in the number of journeys to and from the central area. Around half, again, the journeys turn up in the public transportation system. So again, two very different schemes, very different approaches, but almost exactly the same result. So we have a ton of data. Both London and Stockholm spent a lot of time and effort doing monitoring and trying to understand exactly what was happening. And that's partly because we needed to research it. We needed to understand what are the effects in order to make good decisions later. But also it was really important to have information for the media, because if we didn't pump out information, then they would talk to a trader who said his trade had fallen by half, or a car driver who said, no, it's made absolutely no difference. But if we could present data and present information, we were kind of ahead of that. Actually, in both cities, we found we didn't necessarily need it, because you could see the difference straight away. So this is a picture from the local newspaper Metro. On the left is the day before the charge was introduced in January of 2006, I beg your pardon. And on the right is the same location, the same time of day, the day that congestion charging was introduced. It was between two public holidays around the beginning of the new year, so we shouldn't draw too many massive conclusions from this, but what it illustrates is that the difference was just really obvious to everybody. You didn't need to present data or look at graphs or explain what's going on. People could see it with their own eyes. And that people could see it with their own eyes was a really important element of how it affected public opinion. So two graphs from different public opinion surveys. We shouldn't really compare them because they're asking different questions, but it's the pattern within them that I think is significant. So in London, you see this first point here, before congestion charging was introduced, people were kind of, yeah, some people thought it was a good idea, some people thought it wasn't, lots of people didn't really know. In 2003, before the charge was introduced, people are starting to get more worried, more skeptical. The question is, it's not going to work. It's just moving congestion somewhere else. Public transport won't cope. The business will be killed off completely. Lots of people concerned, basically. And what happens once congestion charging is introduced here in 2003, this public opinion swings completely, and people see that it works. The sky didn't fall on our heads. That it's not the end of the world. And actually, it does what it said it was going to do, and people start becoming in favour. Still a significant proportion of people who are against, but much less than there had been previously. What happens here is around 2005, there was the charge was increased, and they started talking about, or we started talking about extending the congestion charge to the west. So this is probably an effect there of the kind of new changes coming along and people becoming a bit more sceptical. But what you're seeing again is, even around then, is an increase in people who don't really care. It's not a significant question anymore. It's like traffic signals or parking charges or all the other things that are in the transportation system that we don't necessarily love, but we just don't have a very strong opinion about it. On the right, the same kind of, or pretty much exactly the same effect happens in Stockholm before the congestion charge was introduced. A lot more people are opposed than ever were in London. About the same number of people supporting it, a lot less people having no opinion. I think what we're seeing here is the difference between the cities in terms of who is it who drives to the centre of these different cities. I lived in London for about 10 years. I never once drove to the centre of London. I don't know anyone who drove to the centre of London, so lots of people were not affected. In Stockholm, it's much more likely that you will have driven to the centre of Stockholm at least once or twice, and therefore you feel you are more affected and therefore are more likely to have a strong opinion. But again, once charging is introduced in 2006, we see this opinion changing, people becoming in favour. This is the result of the referendum, and you shouldn't really compare opinion surveys with the referendum, but they're on the same graph anyway. So a positive result in the referendum. What happened since then is a very big change to to opinion. So, what I hear often, whoops, no, I went too far. Often is people say yes, but the people in it's the people in the city that are in favour. You know, people in the inner city are obviously very in favour because they get all the benefits without all the disadvantages of not being able to get to the inner city anymore. And there's a certain amount of that. So if you look at the graph in the middle, is showing us that people who live inside the charging zone are much more in favour. Green is in favour, pink is against, yellow is kind of neutral. Yes, people within the city are in favour, but actually people from all parts of the region, from municipal or suburban municipalities that are not exactly rural, but they're kind of, you know, lots of single-family houses and very car-dependent. Even further out in the region, people are very pro, or at least not massively against. So the trial was a success, and people voted for it, and actually voted to say. So there was a trial for about 9 months in 2006. Then there was an election in September of 2006, and at the same time as the election, there was a referendum: do you want to keep the charge or not? And people voted in favour within the city, at least. What happens outside the city is more complex, so I don't really have time to get into that right now. But we've done a lot of work to try and understand why the trial was a success, and what we think, in particular, is what I've been talking about now, is the effects on traffic exceeded people's expectations, and most importantly, they saw those effects with their own eyes. We didn't need to explain it to them; they could see it. What we thought would happen is we'd introduce the congestion tax, and the value of this £5 in London and £20 in Stockholm would just reduce over time with inflation. At the same time, the population of both cities was increasing rapidly. We thought people will see now it's easy to drive, so I'll start driving again. And what we anticipated was that there would be some kind of fluctuation up and down of the effects of the tax, of the number of vehicles coming in, before it took a while to calm down. That didn't happen at all. It reduced, and it stayed reduced, and it's actually in both cities traffic levels have stayed at this lower level more or less since congestion tax was introduced. So on the left-hand slide, you're seeing London, the most significant. This is an index from 2000. It's more or less the dark red line that's the most significant here. It's the central London cordon, which is more or less the same as the congestion tax cordon. And you're seeing not only has the benefits of the congestion tax, or the traffic reduction at least of the congestion tax, been maintained, but actually has been strengthened over time. In Stockholm at the bottom is a very different time series, but again, the most significant lines you're looking at there, the red and the green ones, showing this reduction in traffic when congestion pricing was introduced, and actually in some cases some slight reductions even since then. The first increase of the charge in Stockholm was in 2016, so it's not an increase of the charge here, it's other things happening. Even the blue line, which is showing what's happening at the city boundary, about 6 miles from the congestion cordon, has not seen any significant increase in traffic since then. There's a lot of reasons for this. A lot of it's to do with the congestion tax, but some of it's to do with the oil price. Some of it's to do with the general economy. Sweden didn't suffer particularly badly in the recession, and Stockholm suffered even less, but there's been some impact, obviously. But we think most of it is nevertheless to do with congestion charging. And significantly, the population has been increasing all this time. So the city population has increased by, I think it's about 140, 150,000 since we introduced congestion tax. But at the same time, the numbers of vehicles passing in and out of the city has either stayed the same or been reduced. So there's some indication that actually the effects of this, far from deteriorating over time, are becoming more significant over time. There's two really interesting nerdy details about the implementation in Stockholm that I kind of want to run through quickly. So I said this was a trial of about 9 months in 2006, or about 8 months in fact in 2006. That began in January and ran until July, August. But the implementation of transit improvements was actually introduced about 6 months earlier, in August of 2005, for a number of reasons. One was that the trial was supposed to start then. The other is that that's when we changed all the bus timetables. So actually there was a quite significant boost in transit capacity, mostly in terms of new bus lines, but also some increases in capacity on the metro already in the summer of 2005. So a big investment in the bus system, but actually almost no measurable impact on traffic levels, which is a really interesting result for us. I'll come back to some conclusions around that later. So the traffic, whoops, my computer's a bit slow, so I keep going a bit too fast. These significant traffic reductions of around 18–20%, we don't see those until the charge is introduced. So in summer of 2006, the charge was suspended in order for this referendum to take place. We wanted to prove that, you know, we're serious about the referendum. We're going to suspend the charge. There'll be a debate, and then we'll have the referendum and decide what to do after that. But what happened during that period was that the traffic levels to and from the city never returned to pre-congestion charging levels. About half this 18 to 20% reduction actually remained, not just for the autumn of 2006, but for the whole of the spring of 2007 before the charge was introduced on a permanent basis in summer of 2007. And first, when the charge is reintroduced in 2007, that's when we come back again to this around 18 to 20% reduction, and that's maintained. This graph only stretches to 2009, I think, but basically I can show you the same image right up to 2015, and it's doing pretty much the same thing. Two conclusions that we draw from this. One is that in a city like Stockholm that already has very good transit, building more transit is not actually going to have a huge impact on traffic. If you're building it somewhere that doesn't have good transit, if you're building in a city that doesn't have good transit, then yes, it will probably have some impact. But in a city like Stockholm, it's not having that much impact. It's improving accessibility, it's improving service, it's improving all kinds of things to do with transit. So it's, you know, it's entirely justified. The purpose of transit isn't to reduce traffic congestion, it's to improve accessibility. The other conclusion we can see is that this little nudge of getting people to pay, it was enough to get people to try new behavior, to try to effectivize their journeys, to try public transit, to try walking, to try cycling, and that some of them found that this new behavior was so much better, or was such an improvement, that they maintained it. And that, I think, is a really significant finding for all kinds of TDM, transportation demand management measures, that when something significant happens, when a change happens, when you change job, when you move, that there is absolutely a potential to affect people's behavior. This image is kind of leading on to the next one. It's showing that whilst this is looking at journey time, delay, and the different color graphs that are given information in Swedish there. It's different sets of streets. So the blue one is inner city streets, the purple one is orbital streets, the other ones, they're kind of radial routes in and out, close to the city, further away. What I'm trying to say is with this image really is that even though traffic levels didn't increase to and from the city, the congestion started to become slightly, the congestion benefits started to become slightly less clear. And you can see the very same pattern in London. A couple of things are happening. One is that we are building lots of new infrastructure. We're building lots of new apartments. The city is growing really rapidly. And just construction is obviously very disruptive in the transportation system. But also that we are reallocating road space. We are taking the road space that the road space that's been freed up, if you like, from congestion pricing, and using it for other things. We're using it to prioritize walking and cycling and transit and all kinds of other aspects. And that in itself is having an impact on traffic. And I think this is a really important lesson also, is that it's entirely justified to use the traffic reduction to reallocate road space, but you have to be clear that that's what you're doing. So the people who are paying congestion tax, are they entitled to a better service because they're paying for it? Or is it better to be spending that money on improving alternatives for other people so that you can strengthen the impact of congestion tax? I think it's partly an ideological question, it's partly a political question. So you could do either way. I think the most important thing is that you're clear about what it is that you're doing. But this reduction of this kind of slight erosion of the congestion benefits, of course, is one of the motivations for reviewing the congestion tax, and that's what we did in the last couple of years, leading to a new tax system introduced from the 1st of 2016. And that was partly an increase in the peak charge. It went up from 20 crowns to 35 crowns, so quite a big increase in one go. but also led to a new peak charge on, if I can get my arrow up, this ring road here, which was free during the trial and the first 10 years more or less of implementation. That we started to charge. The charge point is exactly here. Costs about 30 crowns in the rush hour. And as I was saying to Gordon earlier, the traffic reductions of that are, you don't double the charge and get double the reduction you already had, because this kind of law of diminishing returns. The elasticity changes, and the number of people we are affecting by increasing the charge is kind of diminishing. But it's still, it's a 7 to 10% reduction. That's pretty significant. That's the equivalent of the school holidays, more or less. I think what we've done most significantly when we've introduced this new changes to the congestion tax is to be very clear about making it part of a more coherent transportation strategy. So when it was introduced as a trial and then permanently in 2006, 2007, it was kind of, as I was saying, it was hard to say we've done everything we can do, now we're doing congestion tax, because it's kind of the last resort. And what we're doing now is being much clearer about where congestion pricing fits into this an overall transportation strategy, and that's been what a lot of my work's been focused on for the last 5 years or so, is developing this urban mobility strategy, we call it, that's got these three most significant elements. The biggest one, the big pink wheel there, is it's city planning. It's about building the city in the right way. We're building 140,000 new apartments. It's a big chance to change our city quite significantly. But we need to do it in a way that's reducing the need to travel. It's enabling walking, cycling. It's creating the conditions for good public transportation. We're obviously not going to be able to build this 140,000 new apartments, increase the population of the city by 35% without expanding public transportation, without looking at where there are kind of key missing links within the highway network that could help us to lead vehicle flows away from sensitive areas, but also looking at how we manage the assets we have in a better way. So this is about reducing the need to travel. This is about kind of increasing capacity to transport people. This is about reallocating street space, both in order to create room for more people to move, but also to create more travel choices, but also to create good street environments and minimize negative impacts. And this is where we will put congestion pricing, for example. It's a way of making sure that we are using the infrastructure we have in the absolute best possible way. So I said I was going to talk a bit about what we're looking at going forward. This is one of the main arterial routes leading into the centre of Stockholm. So here is Gamla Stan, the old town at the top. This is an island called Södermalm, where about 130,000 people live, very dense inner city area. Just outside, this is actually where I live, in Liljeholmen. It's a former harbour area that's being rapidly developed into apartments and workspaces, and is densifying very quickly. But what you'll see in this picture is this very significant amount of space that is being taken up by this highway. And all cities have got this kind of infrastructure. We've built highways where we want people to move very quickly, and they mean lots of ramp systems and grade separation. It also means you can't live very close to it because of noise, because of pollution, because of risk. And what we're thinking about is this red circle, by the way, is where the congestion charge point is at the moment. If you kind of keep your eye on this this arterial highway, and I move over to the vision picture, there's a lot of land here that we could build quite a lot. It's close to good public transport. It's walking distance to the centre. It's it's a real quick win in terms of building more city. But in order to be able to do that, we need to turn this fast highway like structure or infrastructure into something that's going to look more like a city street, basically. And that's going to mean reducing the speed of traffic. It's going to mean thinking about where we're putting the queues, but it's also going to mean reducing the overall number of vehicles if we're going to meet air quality standards, if we're going to meet noise standards, if this street is going to be somewhere that people want to be and spend time and go to shops and maybe sit in pavement cafes. The way the street looks today, it's almost impossible to imagine that, but this is such a huge, significant piece of land that we need to be able to think about that. And this kind of this thought process, this planning process is being repeated all over the city at the moment. We're starting to look at this enormous land parcels that are around all of the big highways, and how we can, with the help of demand management, with the help of reducing the amount of traffic, build more city, basically, because it's city that people want. It's city that people are prepared to pay a lot of money for, and we have lots of research around what it is that's driving the property market and driving up property prices. It's density, it's mixed use, it's walkable, it's city. So if I try to wrap it up a little bit, I spent about 5-6 years at Transport for London, traveling around the world and bringing in foreign delegations, and they all wanted to know what are your lessons learned. And this was our standard presentation of lessons learned. Actually, I stole it from an old presentation I have at Transport for London, and we would say it's all about a very strong political commitment of the mayor. It's really essential. You have this politician who is the standard bearer who drives it through. You need really effective research. You need really, really clear policy objectives that you've communicated really well. You need lots and lots of consultation, stakeholder engagement, project management, alternatives, effective traffic management, really strong public information campaign. And I drank the Kool-Aid on this and was really, really, yes, this is exactly what you need. And then I came to Stockholm and started thinking about how many of these things were actually true in the Stockholm case. And okay, this slide looks a bit of a mess, but if we kind of look at what does the Stockholm experience say related to all of these things, we talked a bit about the political situation at the beginning, and the political commitment in Stockholm is much, much less clear. The political, this mayor, Annika Billström, had said she was against it and then was forced to introduce it and was kind of had to stand there and stand up for it, but no one really believed her. Yes, there was effective research, but the objectives were much, much less clear. There was discussion about environment, there were discussions about congestion, there were discussions about business, there were the whole why are we doing this was it was much more blurred, I think. Public consultation was really, really limited. The timescales for introducing congestion tax in Stockholm was so fast that getting anything done was really quite difficult in terms of public consultation. But there was a referendum. The 4 next things, so project management, public transport alternatives, effective traffic management, strong public information, yes, we agree on all of those, but these first 3 that are maybe some of the most significant, it's not clear that what London said was their lessons learned can be backed up by what Stockholm's experience was. So based on that, I tried to come up with what my lessons learned were. And I would say the first thing is the politics behind this is really, really, really hard. Do not underestimate how difficult this is for politicians. And you need to kind of do what works locally. Find a way to come forward. It's going to be really difficult. There's going to be lots of opposition. There's going to be judicial challenges. There's going to be constitutional issues. It's going to be really hard to do, but it's worth it. I personally think the very best argument is about efficiency. And again, I talked to Gordon a bit about that at the beginning. It's about saying if you like driving a car in the city, if you think cars are an important part of the city infrastructure, a part of the transport makeup, then you need to be campaigning for congestion charging, basically. It's also about tailoring solutions to local needs and conditions. So again, 2 very different cities with very different geography, very different politics, very different culture, a very different problem from the beginning. And yes, they're using pricing, but in 2 very different ways, 2 very different systems that are basically doing the same thing. And yes, you need to be clear about the why, but there can be lots of different whys. I think we kind of think that the public can only take on board one argument at a time, and I think we sometimes really underestimate how the public's ability to take on complex discussions. And yes, you need to present it in the right way, you need to frame it in the right way, but I think people can understand that you can be doing one thing, but you can have more than one goal for it. So to finish off, my 3 top tips, actually it's 4 top tips, but I didn't dare say the 4th one. So 3 top tips, think about how you want to frame the discussion. I think personally efficiency, talking about market solutions are really, really important, but, and it's quite a big but, you need to make sure that you're addressing the question about equity. Are we reserving street space for rich people? Are we making it possible only for people in the most expensive Volvo to drive to the centre of Stockholm, or are we actually making more transportation choices, making more ability to get where people want to be? it's really important to make pricing a part of a coherent mobility strategy, and I think we did that in London. We did not do it anything like to the same extent in Stockholm, and we're paying for it now in kind of putting back together this this strategy and explaining how congestion pricing is part of a whole. And I think this is a really important one. It starts simple. So we, both in London and in Stockholm, took a lot of criticism from particularly the academic sector. Professors, excuse me, can be really unforgiving. They don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Start simple, get what you can in, and then expand it, make it better, iterate it until you find something that is good. Don't wait until the perfect technology is available. Don't wait until the perfect system is available. Do what's available now and move onward from that position. My fourth top tip is, of course, employ me. That's all I had.
Thank you, Daniel. I can see actually where you could spend the rest of your career, just touring around and telling people about how to do it.